Welcome to our team case analysis of Netflix. In this presentation, we will review Netflix's history, current strategic issues, and recommendations moving forward. We will begin by reviewing the history of Netflix, where they began to where they are at today. Netflix was founded in 1997 by Reed Hastings and Marc Randolph. After looking for a DVD to watch that they could not find, the pair wondered to themselves if one could be shipped via mail on demand. They tested the theory using a music CD, which arrived to Hastings' house safely. A year later, the company would launch with an online website that users could rent DVDs from. A year later, Netflix introduced its online subscription service, which allowed users an unlimited number of DVD rentals for a monthly fee, with tiered subscription services allowing for an increased number of rentals to be out at any given time before being mailed back using prepaid postage. After accumulating 600,000 subscribers, Netflix went public on NASDAQ in 2002, initially offering 5.5 million shares for $15 a share. Netflix currently sells for $616 a share, consistently performing at the top of the S&P 500. Marc Randolph would leave the company a year later, preferring to focus on startup organizations, ceding the CEO position to Hastings, who has held the position ever since. In 2003, the company was awarded a patent on its subscription rental service by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. A pivotal moment occurred for Netflix in 2007 when it launched its online streaming service. One of the first companies to offer film and television show streaming through its website, Netflix would eventually launch applications to allow for digital streaming through every popular television, tablet, and mobile phone product on the market. In 2012, subscriptions surpassed 25 million. Another pivotal moment occurred for the company in 2013. Netflix launched the first of its original series. House of Cards and Orange is the New Black would quickly become streaming sensations. Just 3 years later, in 2016, the company would release more original series or films than any other network or cable channel. That same year, Netflix expanded into 130 new countries. By 2019, Netflix was winning awards for its original programming, with Roma taking home Best Director and Best Foreign Language Film. This year, subscription memberships surpassed 200 million, demonstrating Netflix's strong market share. Here we present Netflix's current leadership team, starting with founder and co-CEO Reed Hastings. Reed and the company faced a lawsuit from Activision Blizzard in 2020 after their CFO, Spencer Neumann, left the video game company to join the streaming giant. Co-CEO and Chief Content Officer Ted Sarandos has been with the company since 2000. He has been credited with initiating the company's first round of original programming. Maria Ferreras oversees all global partnerships that Netflix enters into. She previously worked in a similar role for both Google and YouTube. After working in communications and public relations for Google, Uber, and Facebook, Rachel Whetstone joined Netflix in 2018. Greg Peters has been with Netflix since 2008. Overseeing global partnerships with consumer electronics companies and internet service providers, the infrastructure of the company. Bozoma St. John is Netflix's Chief Marketing Officer and has previously been a marketing executive for Uber, Apple Music, and PepsiCo. David Hyman has been the chief legal officer for Netflix for nearly 2 decades and has seen the company through most of its growth and acquisitions. Culture. Netflix's core philosophy is people over process, which includes all of the values listed here. They believe that too many organizations have an unhealthy emphasis on process and not individual freedom. Most organizations don't start this way due to the creativity necessary to innovate and become successful. But at some point, as complexity increases, talent and passion levels go down. Netflix is dedicated to maintaining employee freedom and passion using these values. It does so in the following ways. Their vacation policy is take vacation. They do not have any vacation rules or forms around how many days or weeks employees may take off. Their parental leave policy is take care of your baby and yourself. The company reports that most employees take between 4 to 8 months off after the birth of a child. Every year, each employee chooses how much of their compensation they want in salary versus stock options. They can choose all cash, 100% stock options, or any combination of the two. The stock options are fully vested, and the employees keep them even if they leave the company. Netflix believes that these policies, or lack thereof, is what empowers their employees to stay dedicated, creative, and focused on success. Their goal is to inspire people more than to manage them. By avoiding unnecessary rules, Netflix prides itself on encouraging independent decision-making by sharing information openly, broadly, and deliberately. They encourage employees to be candid with one another and also strive to keep only highly effective people. Strategic direction. For nearly a decade now, Netflix's primary strategic direction has been to finance the creation of original content. It has actually been quite brilliant in its strategic positioning since its founding. Not only was it among the first to recognize the impact of personal electronic broadband access would have on the availability of digital streaming, but just as important, it foresaw how severely its market share would suffer once everyone else smartened up to what it already knew. When Netflix originally began streaming, it did so by licensing content from movie and television studios who were eager to obtain a new form of revenue from the movies that had long since run their course at the theaters, and television series whose box set DVD sales had already been maximized. Smartly, Netflix realized that if their predictions about streaming were accurate, large content owners such as Disney, Fox, and CBS would eventually realize that more revenue could be obtained from running their own streaming platforms rather than licensing their content to Netflix. This writing on the wall would lead Netflix to begin financing its own content in 2013. One of its first significant investments, House of Cards, became a massive success. Orange is the New Black would quickly follow as Netflix became the first internet TV network to receive Primetime Emmy nominations, a previously unthinkable achievement. By the end of the year, Netflix had increased its subscription numbers from approximately 25 million to 40. In 2016, Netflix released approximately 126 original series or films. The following year, it announced its intent to have half of its library consist of original content within the next 2 years. This strategy would not come cheap, though, and the company has incurred significant debt as a result. Since it began creating its original content, Netflix has accumulated a staggering $15 billion in debt. For years now, its growing debt has been a major source of concern for investors, worried that the same swift industry swerves that found DVDs fall way to digital content could possibly occur again and leave them holding a rather large bill for Netflix's misguided vision. An ever-increasing debt-to-equity ratio and 3.5 billion cash loss reports in 2019 were certainly cause for concern. But when put in perspective of Netflix using this debt to increase its market cap from 11.5 billion to over 260 billion in the last decade, it appears that their long-term strategy is sound. Earlier this year, the company announced that it would be cash neutral going forward and would no longer need external financing to fund operations. 40% of Netflix's U.S. library is now made up of either Netflix originals or programming not available on any other service. This is an impressive feat considering that between movies and television shows, their library consists of just over 5,000 titles. Globally, the company owns or licenses over 13,600 titles in 190 countries.
Netflix has looked to diversification in many different aspects when it comes to progressing as a company. Beginning as a DVD rental service, the company diversified into a subscription-based service only a year after its inception. About 8 years after that, Netflix introduced the online streaming aspect of the company, which dramatically increased their popularity and number of consumers. After the transition from DVD rental to on-demand streaming, Netflix has since diversified its output and opened numerous subsidiaries. These subsidiaries include the US-based Netflix Studios, the Netflix Services Germany GmbH, which is obviously Germany-based, and the Singapore-based Netflix Pte. Limited. These act as production studios that produce and co-produce original content. By producing their own shows and films, Netflix is able to promote the exclusivity of their content, which creates the drive for consumers purchasing their streaming service product. The marketing aspect of Netflix has diversified significantly since the inception of the company. Netflix originally only had marketing or advertising efforts to social media. The company soon realized that they could capitalize greatly off advertising efforts through YouTube with ads on their videos. This saw an increase in consumer demand for their streaming services. More recently, Netflix has maintained and greatly improved their social media presence, and now the company even produces its own commercials for their original content, such as shows or movies.
Corporate responsibility. Netflix takes seriously its impact upon both the environment and society at large. To this extent, it has two major corporate programs that it actively promotes and reports on. The first, its Net Zero Plus Nature commitment to the environment, which includes a goal to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by the end of 2022 and every year after. To do this, Netflix plans to reduce their internal emissions on a 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway aligned with climate science, and address indirect emissions in partnership with their suppliers. For emissions Netflix and its suppliers cannot avoid, they must retain nature's existing carbon storage, protecting ecosystems like forests that prevent carbon from entering the atmosphere, and invest in high-impact projects aligned with climate science. And finally, remove carbon from the atmosphere by restoring and regenerating natural ecosystems. Netflix will focus especially on projects that advance sustainable livelihoods, biodiversity, climate resilience, and environmental justice. Netflix also reports quarterly on its diversity and inclusion, recognizing that its greatest impact is creating empathy and understanding through the stories they tell. Netflix believes more people deserve to see their lives on screen and are committed to finding new voices and working with established talent to increase the diversity of their films and series. To do this, Netflix recruits employees from different backgrounds and cultures that celebrate those differences. In fact, women make up half of Netflix workforce at 47.1%, including at the leadership level, directors and above 47.8%, vice presidents 43.7%, and senior leadership at 47.6%. In nearly half of their U.S. workforce, 46.4%, and leadership, 42%, director level and above, are made up of people from one or more underrepresented racial and or ethnic backgrounds, including Black, Latino or Hispanic, Indigenous, Middle Eastern, Asian, and Pacific Islander backgrounds. And the number of Black employees in the United States doubled in the last 3 years to 8% of their workforce and 9% of their leadership, director level and above.
Cost leadership is the generic strategy on the part of Netflix to ensure that the company has a competitive advantage over its competitors and other companies that are in the market. This strategy is ensured through minimizing costs, giving them the ability to sell at affordable prices for the consumer while not particularly providing a provider of the best cost. The generic strategy of cost leadership aligns directly with Netflix's strategies of intense growth, and this allows for market prioritization. The goal of the strategy to satisfy the customers through partly personalized customizations at minimal cost allows for capitalization of both domestic and international markets as availability of goods increases as well.
Netflix SWOT analysis. Strengths. Market share. Netflix was one of the first companies to enter the streaming media industry and as a result holds a sizable market share of the industry. At 209 million subscribers, Netflix subscribers greatly outnumber the 116 million for Disney Plus and 42.8 million for Hulu. Amazon is more difficult to compare as their video streaming device or service comes packaged with their Amazon Prime shipping subscription, the latter of which only boasts 150 million. It is estimated that 26 million of those Amazon subscribers use the Prime Video service that Netflix directly competes with. Brand recognition. Netflix recognized that Blockbuster Video did not, the inevitable reach of the internet into our everyday lives. As a result, they have established themselves as being synonymous with the cord-cutting trend of consumers looking to ditch overpriced bundled television services typically offered by established providers such as Comcast, DirecTV, and Dish. The term Netflix and chill is ingrained in popular culture for reasons I am certain the company does not mind. Original content. In addition to foreshadowing the internet revolution that would overtake Blockbuster, Netflix also realized that its growing popularity would put it at odds with the media conglomerates who owned all of the content that Netflix relied upon. As a result, Netflix has invested heavily in original content since 2013. Series such as House of Cards and Orange is the New Black and Stranger Things have paid off massively for Netflix subscription numbers. And high adaptability. Netflix continually modifies its service based on the market and the viewer's choice. It is the reason Netflix is currently high on demand. Netflix SWOT analysis weaknesses. Large operating expenses and long-term debt obligations. Netflix's original content has come at a cost. The company has incurred significant long-term debt, nearly $15 billion, in order to produce the content that has allowed it to compete with major production studios. This debt has adversely affected their free cash flow, but is seen by most investors as necessary in order to maintain their existing market share. Global presence. The US and Canadian markets account for over 40% of all Netflix subscribers, leaving many potential global markets unfulfilled. Limited copyright. Netflix has limited copyright, which tolls upon their revenue. and customer service. Netflix lacks sound customer care executives, which harms customer service, leading to decreased customer satisfaction. Netflix SWOT analysis opportunities. New market penetration. Recognizing its lack of global presence, Netflix has invested $400 million over the last several years in developing original content and licensing additional content for the Asia-Pacific region. As a result, close to half of its paid membership growth for Q3 of 2020 came from this region alone. This effort can be duplicated in other regions that the company identifies as significant potential return in. Brand awareness. As Netflix has a strong brand reputation, the great demand for OTT platforms in the current market can allow the brand to expand. Platform expansion. Since Netflix is signing up for exclusive Netflix-only content, they can bring in other products lines, including video games, comic books, and more. And no to ads. The company can choose to work on new concepts that are better than other OTT platforms. Netflix has already said no to the traditional advertising-based business model, which is an opportunity for them to provide good customer service. Netflix SWOT analysis threats. New market entrants. Netflix was well ahead of the curve on entering the streaming media services market, and as a result, owns a considerable share. Unfortunately, it is facing the threat of numerous new entrants who come to the market with established content libraries that in some cases exceed the popularity of Netflix's, without those other companies having to invest the original content capital that Netflix had to. Government and regulatory barriers. Netflix relies upon the ability of consumers to easily and reliably access its services through the internet. Netflix's operating expenses could be adversely affected by ISP's ability to block, restrict, or otherwise impair access to their services based upon legal and regulatory rulings. Licensing and content costs. As previously mentioned, Netflix has accumulated nearly $15 billion in debt in order to finance the production of original content for its streaming services. In the past, Netflix was able to rely upon licensing agreements with media distributors who did not operate or fall under the umbrella of a competitor. As more media companies enter the streaming service market, they will undoubtedly be reluctant to renew their licensing agreements, putting increased pressure on Netflix to continue its trend of using debt to finance new content creation. COVID-19. COVID-19 has affected the reproduction of new original shows and movies. Like most parts of the entertainment industry, Netflix is also affected by the pandemic. Gradually, with normalization, the conditions will improve. And sharing accounts. Another reason for fewer customers for Netflix is that many people share one account simultaneously.
Next, let's take a look at Porter's 5 forces model, as this can be a useful way to understand the pressures that Netflix faces. We'll first discuss the threat of substitutes, in this case, existing streaming services. Next, the bargaining power of buyers, in this case, the customers. Then the threat of new entrants, which in this case would be the new streaming services that are being launched. Then the bargaining power of suppliers, in this case, the studios and content creators. And finally, competitive rivalry between the firms in the market. First, the threat of substitutes. Though Netflix has the largest market share in the streaming services market, it faces numerous competitors that could serve as viable substitutes for the customers. This graph shows the market share that Netflix has relative to its competitors in the US in the year 2020. The top competitors for Netflix are Amazon Prime Video, Hulu, HBO Max, and Disney Plus, though there are numerous others. Despite this, there are a few caveats that must be considered when trying to understand the market share distribution shown in this graph. Amazon Prime Video is bundled as a part of the Amazon Prime services and provides subscribers with free shipping from Amazon.com and music streaming. Also, a majority share, 66.7% of Hulu, is owned by the Walt Disney Company, which also owns Disney Plus. Note that these caveats only emphasize the stiff competition that Netflix faces and only reinforces the fact that Netflix must actively adjust its strategy to maintain its market leadership position. Next, let's take a look at the bargaining power of customers. Customers can subscribe to multiple streaming services, though they are unlikely to subscribe to all of these streaming services. As you can see, the prices for each of the streaming services vary and have fluctuated over time. Not listed here are various special promotional prices for year-long subscriptions for several of the streaming services. This means that though these services are not direct substitutes for each other due to their unique content, they will likely still be a moderate amount of cross-elasticity of demand. Changes to pricing or content to any one of these streaming services will likely have an effect on the number of customers for each of the services. Next, the threat of new entrants. The threat of new entrants has always been an issue for Netflix. Recently, major networks and studios have started to adopt a direct-to-customer model. Why should they license content out to outside streaming services when the networks themselves can create their own streaming services to sell content directly to customers? Since 2019, there have been a slew of new streaming services that have launched. Several of the more notable ones are Apple TV+, Disney+, Peacock, HBO Max, Discovery+, and AMC+. Each of these have launched to varying degrees of success. Technological innovations and improvements to overall internet infrastructure have made new entrants much more likely. The barrier to entry has been minimized. The customer is also knowledgeable about streaming services thanks in part to Netflix, and the widespread adoption of smartphones, tablets, smart TVs has primed the market for new entrants. These competitors are expected to take market share from Netflix as they grow in content offerings. As this data shows, new subscribers are moving to many of the new streaming services. This leads well into Porter's other five forces, supplier bargaining power. The bargaining power of suppliers is particularly relevant in the streaming market because of the supply, in this case, recognizable entertainment. Movies and TV shows with cultural significance can attract a large streaming audience. The power of suppliers becomes apparent when you realize Netflix has spent nearly $14.6 billion on licensing content in just the year 2019. This rise of new streaming services, created by networks that have in the past licensed content to Netflix, poses a significant issue for Netflix moving forward. Take, for example, networks that have launched their own streaming services, like Disney+, which will, moving forward, exclusively stream all of its iconic Disney and Pixar movies on its own Disney+ platform. As earlier licensing deals for Disney to allow Netflix to stream these movies expires, it is unlikely to be renewed, meaning Netflix will start losing much of this content. Similarly, content produced by NBC, another major network, is likely to be removed from Netflix and moved to NBC Peacock. The power of suppliers that have not created their own streaming services will also increase. As there are a larger number of streaming services bidding for a limited amount of original content, this is where studios like MGM and Sony find themselves. Next, moving to the competitive rivalry between these firms. As you can see, the expected revenue share for Netflix will likely decrease over the coming year. At the same time, subscription revenues overall are unlikely to grow substantially. This is mainly due to the forces we have discussed. In order to stop this trend, Netflix must take action to maintain its market share. One of the major effects of rivalry between these streaming services and bargaining power that suppliers have is the increased investment in original content. This can, over the long term, minimize the licensing costs for each service as discussed earlier. This graph shows the change in original TV content funding of several of the large streaming services from 2020 to 2021. As you can see, Netflix is aggressively increasing its funding of original content, specifically TV content, relative to its competitors. Note that this does not include original movie content that Netflix is also funding. This is all because Netflix has expected this pullback of content by studios and content creators, and therefore has taken steps to mitigate this issue. Due to the increasing competitive rivalry, Netflix has steadily increased its original content spending budget from 6.8% in 2014 to 37.8% in 2020. This is expected to grow to nearly 15% of its spending budget by 2025, at which point Netflix will likely spend up to $18.9 billion on original content production.
There are a few current problems that exist with Netflix, and some are more severe than others. Nonetheless, we'll address them. The first and biggest problem that arises for Netflix is the need for more original content, as competitors pull their own content from Netflix and provide it through their own respective platforms or streaming services. This has, in recent years, plagued Netflix, as there have been very influential shows or movies pulled from the streaming platform. Another problem that is projected to arise for Netflix is the market share. The company's market share is expected to drop over the next few years because of new entrants into the streaming market. This leads to the loss of exclusivity with several syndicated shows such as Friends and The Office. These grossly popular shows were pulled from Netflix and now are available only on their respective streaming service companies. Traditionally, Netflix has not pursued long-term partnerships with production studios or other streaming platforms, which could also lead to problems both currently and in the future, as there will be an urge for them to conform to market demands and change their approach to certain aspects. Most recently, a problem that has occurred for Netflix is the controversy and the negative press from partnerships with comedian Dave Chappelle. His most recent comedy show, that was exclusively released and shown through Netflix, turned out to produce a lot of negativity, and there were some repercussions that the company had to and even still is having to deal with today.
Recommendations. Netflix should continue investing in exclusive comedy and stand-up specials. Netflix paid over $500 million for the exclusive rights to all seasons of The Seinfeld Show. Netflix's deal with Seinfeld also helped solidify their relationship with Jerry Seinfeld himself. The platform already had the rights to his roving talk show, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, and had financed 2 stand-up specials, Jerry Before Seinfeld and 23 Hours to Kill. In June, Seinfeld announced he would be working on a new Netflix movie titled Unfrosted. Also, there are partnerships with Dave Chappelle. Promote and expand its recently launched mobile gaming platform. Just this month, Netflix updated its mobile app to give subscribers access to several mobile games, 2 of which are linked to its popular Stranger Things franchise. According to Yahoo, the mobile game market is worth approximately $100 billion and is estimated to grow to $272 billion by the end of the decade. Obtaining mobile gaming consumers who otherwise wouldn't subscribe to their streaming service is an excellent way to expand their brand and get a foothold in the booming industry. Netflix should partner with companies such as Sony whenever possible to expand content library without incurring production costs. Netflix should strengthen its partnership with Sony and look to partner with other companies whenever possible. The 2 companies are already working together, as Netflix owns the streaming rights for all Sony Picture films, including the new Uncharted film. Netflix and Sony Pictures Entertainment have inked a multi-year deal starting in 2022 to stream the studio's feature films in the United States after their theatrical and home entertainment run. Netflix needs to actively pursue the rights to the Ultimate Fighting Championship, UFC, when its contract expires with ESPN in 2025. Netflix can broker a domestic partnership with Comcast or Xfinity like they already have in place in the United Kingdom. Sky Q owners have been able to access selected titles via a dedicated Netflix app. Going forward, consumers will also be given the option of signing up for Netflix's basic subscription plan, all coming off of the same bill. And finally, Netflix should partner with a major sport such as Major League Baseball to stream live sports, replicating what ESPN Plus does with Spanish soccer, Peacock does with English soccer, Amazon Prime does with Thursday Night Football in the NFL, these will open doors to live sports, which will enable opportunities to better compete with rivals.